Ever felt like a rat in a trap? Like you're running for your life, but you're getting nowhere. Nowhere, except the edge of the dark, and the dreams of death, in the shadowed rooms. Today on the Comic Book Report, Wolverine, Weapon X by Barry Windsor-Smith. Stick around and check it out. Greetings, bub. My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm finally taking a closer look at Wolverine, Weapon X. This is a really iconic Wolverine origin-ish storyline that I've read 2 or 3 times, but I've never sat down to really give it a review on the channel, so I'm going to go ahead and rectify that today. So without further ado, let's get started on the review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written and illustrated by Barry Windsor-Smith. The issues in this volume were first published by Marvel Comics beginning in 1991. The volume itself collects Marvel Comics Presents issues 72 through 84. And finally, this trade paperback collection comes in at 152 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that standard size trade paperback from Marvel Comics. Again, this collects the Wolverine Weapon X storyline from Barry Windsor-Smith. I have this trade paperback. It has nice glossy print pages. I've had this in my collection for some time. I do also have this in an oversized format contained within the Wolverine Omnibus Volume 1. Really enjoyed that was included in that hardcover, but I still kept this little collection, and I'm really happy I did because I think it'll be easier to do a full review on just this book with just this storyline. And now that we've taken a little bit of a look at the exteriors, I just wanted to do a quick moment to show you the binding of this book. So the binding here is nothing spectacular. It is glued binding, but I found the gutter loss to be fairly minimal. It did lay open quite well, as you'll see, and overall a very fine addition to showcase this collection. Okay, and now to jump into the collection proper. So as I mentioned at the top, this collects Marvel Comics Presents issue 72 through 84. This is the Weapon X storyline. It wasn't Weapon X issues 1 through whatever. It was part of the Marvel Comics Presents series, but it's a really good read as a standalone, almost graphic novel for those that are unaware of kind of what this is. I do think you can completely read this standalone, but I think that knowing more about Wolverine as a general context would help enrich this storytelling here. But I actually think the converse is even more true, that if you read this, it will automatically enrich every Wolverine story you'll read after this. Because to me, this is a really good, one of the definitive origin stories for this character. I know there's also Wolverine Origins, among other titles out there, but this to me is one of the best early Wolverine stories. This is when he was experimented on in the Weapon X program, and it's a really violent and horrific part of his history that really informs the character we know today. Something I really enjoyed about this title as well was that it was both written and illustrated by Barry Windsor-Smith, and his art style is something I really enjoy. It's very visceral, gritty, graphic, detailed, and it makes this horror that you see depicted in these pages even more gripping because of how painstaking all of these images seem to look. They just look horrible. He looks like he's being tortured like an animal throughout most of this book. So for people that maybe don't like violence, this might be a harder read for some, but we know that this is part of Wolverine's backstory, and it's such an important chapter. Another note on the art as well that I liked, in the midst of all that, again, kind of visceral, graphic violence, we also have a real clear and crisp look at Wolverine's humanity. There's something about the character models that we see and something about the way he does faces, particularly Wolverine's, that just depicts this kind of nobility and humanity even in the midst of all the savagery. And I think that that juxtaposition is really striking and something that really jumps out of the page of this collection throughout. And it's something that I really enjoy in a lot of Wolverine stories. We have this kind of savage samurai dichotomy that's all within this one character. He's animalistic yet noble. He's wise but just completely barbaric. It's what really makes his character stand apart in a lot of ways. And again, like I said, this is an important chapter in the history, and I think that it is absolutely one to be read for Wolverine fans out there, or even greater X-Men fans. As far as what the Weapon X story is about, this is when Wolverine is experimented on, when he's bonded to the Adamantium and has his mind wiped. These are the experiments that really lead to a lot of the future storytelling of this character. This is also a kind of loose basis for that Wolverine Origins movie. I think that that kind of dabbles with this, some of that Wolverine Origins storyline itself, and its own little special mix. But all that stuff where he has the tubes in him and he's in the vats and he's being kind of, bonded with the Adamantium, that all comes from here, this Weapon X storyline. A unique facet of the storytelling as well is it kind of proceeds in some ways like a horror movie where we have these people who have, Wolverine, they're experimenting on him and all these kind of creepy, strange things happen while he's being experimented on and he's in this state kind of being tortured and, has the metal bonded to him and stuff. And ultimately he escapes and wreaks havoc before just kind of escaping into the snow. I think this book also really recalls a lot of thematically important things about Wolverine storytelling, which is kind of the humanity versus sort of the bestial nature of Wolverine. Like treating him like, is he human or is he just some kind of creature? Is he some kind of monstrous animal? And I think that that is really played out through the pages of this, where obviously a lot of his tormentors and these scientists really kind of view him as not human. He's not a person. He doesn't have humanity. They're just making him sort of a living killing machine. They're creating this experiment. And we have that again when we know he's this noble-souled man who has just overcome so much, but he does struggle with that kind of animalistic nature. Like there is almost a part of him that is that kind of creature. But to completely remove his humanity to justify these experiments is just a really horrendous thing to witness, and to know it's happening to a beloved character, and to see this as just kind of a kernel and something at the foundational core of this character. Like I said, so much hinges on this storyline. It is a pivotal chapter, and in many ways one of the most important chapters of the Wolverine character of all time. I think one of the kind of higher points for me in this collection as well, I really love how Windsor-Smith does the action sequences. There's a lot of gunfire, there's a lot of adamantium claws, there's a lot of just action sequences. There's even a period where Wolverine kind of fights like wolves or these kind of like, forest animals. And they're just brutal scenes. They're really wild and they're depicted so beautifully for what they are. And I think that the sense of motion, the sense of action that we see depicted is really striking. The panel layout is pretty standard, a lot of rectangles and squares. They don't really deviate too much beyond, a couple splash pages and things like that. But I think it's really effective. I've never really felt pulled out of this story overall. Once you're in, you're pretty glued until you reach the end. There is a part with the narrative to me that sometimes is hard to follow as Wolverine is kind of reflecting, or we get the interior monologue that's almost kind of a disconnected fugue state of ideas and thoughts running through his head. And so that's sometimes a little hard to follow, but when we understand that we're looking at these elements throughout his experimentation and knowing the kind of stuff he's subjected to, I think that the narration really does fit. I think that we don't have some of the clarity we sometimes have in Wolverine narration, but again, it's through such a drastic time. And there's other times where I think the narration works just absolutely flawlessly. So it's kind of a mixed bag here. But like I said, very striking. I feel like the dialogue is almost secondary in a collection like this. I think, first of all, the art really shines out the most. Then the actual storyline, and then kind of just the characterization in the visuals of the characters, I think, are very striking. And then I think the dialogue is the layer maybe under that, if I had to somehow break it down. But obviously, with all good works, with all good works of art, it's kind of the synthesis of all these elements and more that really create the product that we just love. And I'll be honest, I've read Weapon X maybe 2 or 3 times now, and I think that I'm enjoying it more the more times I read it. I think the first time I read it, I was a little confused. I didn't know what to expect. I think that there was a level where I think I was hoping to have a more clear, linear sort of narrative that I could understand more readily at first. I think some people will digest this immediately and be fine, but the first time I read it, I think that I expected it to be a little more fed to me in a way that was, again, a little more point A to point B. And I think that there's so much nuance here. There's such a dense kind of storytelling and so many implications that you have to consider and think about, and images that I'd have to just really focus on and just kind of draw interpretations from in different ways, that I find that every time I return to this book, I actually like it more. And like I said, I think that reading this really enriches other Wolverine stories, and the opposite is true too. The more I love the character of Wolverine, the more I see some of his exploits in other X-Men books, comics, events, even some of the films, the more I go back and read this, and I'm just kind of horrified at this chapter in his history. And I think that that is such a telling and commendable thing about this work, that no matter where I go, it's almost like you can't escape this book. And so if you're a Wolverine fan and haven't read this, you've gotta. Admittedly, it's oftentimes not a light read. Like I said, it's heavy. It deals with some dark elements of humanity, the kind of barbaric torture and just sadistic things that are done to this character. It's not one that you could just read necessarily easily or lightheartedly, but it's one that if you really want to have a better understanding of this character, this is a good one to read. And I know you can find this online, digital. You could probably track down these issues, trade paperback collections like this, or again, I know they've reprinted it in a couple ways. I also have it, like I said, in that Wolverine Omnibus Volume 1. So this is out there. This is a prevalent story. And frankly, it really is just haunting. It's hard to forget some of the images you see in this book, and it really does inform in some ways how I see the character of Wolverine and how I see where he's come from and things like that. I think to have such a profound artistic talent on this, like Barry Windsor-Smith, to also have a strong narrative storytelling as well, coming from the same artist for both writing and illustration, it's just really amazing. It's a really singular product that I think fits in really well within the Wolverine canon. Like I mentioned, I'm really happy it was included in that Wolverine Omnibus that I unboxed a while ago. But yeah, a spectacular Wolverine story. I think for fans that have only read some of the modern Wolverine, I'm thinking even like Benjamin Percy modern, I think that you wouldn't be too out of place going back and reading something like this. For older time fans or fans that like to read more than just the modern era of comics, you've probably already read this, but if not, it's definitely one to consider, again, for X-Men and Wolverine fans out there. And as you can see, my trade paperback includes some of the covers and just a couple of those little extras at the back. There's also a little kind of recolored few pages of one of the issues. Very cool little collection. Really liked it. And now that we've approached the end of this trade paperback collection, I did want to again just show you where else you can find this collection. I have it in my Wolverine Volume 1 Omnibus, which you can see here. This is also just an incredible book. I did an unboxing, but I might have to go back and review. At any rate, it's time to give Weapon X a grade. For arguably one of the most pivotal moments in Wolverine's character history, illustrated in visceral, graphic detail by the wonderful Barry Windsor-Smith, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Wolverine Weapon X a B+. This is by no means a comfort read, and yet I find myself returning to it again and again. This is one of the definitive Wolverine origin stories, and I consider an absolute must-read for any fan of Wolverine or the X-Men. I believe it is above all an art piece followed by a very, very intimate, character-driven narrative that really explores a haunting portion of the origins of this beloved character. If you've read Wolverine Weapon X, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please consider subscribing to the channel and maybe checking out some of my other videos. Have a good one.